I was sort of dragging myself around in some, coma of like emotional dither, and I didn't know him. Burt was the most popular actor at the time. So it was just a risk. You just sometimes take a risk.
The world remembers Sally Field and Burt Reynolds laughing inside a speeding Trans Am. Field remembers something far more complicated.
I had just done my first sort of film. I was wondering, why does he want? It was impossible for me to get a role in a film. And yet he was calling me to be in this film, and I couldn't figure out why. And then he said he always loved me.
In 2026, she revealed that only their first movie felt like a genuine collaboration. In the 3 that followed, she felt reduced to just a girl. Reynolds helped place her inside a blockbuster, then, according to Field, tried to stop her from accepting the role that won her first Oscar. How did Hollywood's most electric romance become a struggle for control? The call she never expected. The relationship began with a telephone call Sally Field never expected to receive. By the mid-1970s, Burt Reynolds had become the embodiment of swaggering Hollywood masculinity. He had the grin, the mustache, the athletic confidence, and a screen persona that made rebellion look effortless. Field occupied a very different position in the industry. Audiences knew her from Gidget, which premiered in 1965, and The Flying Nun, which ran from 1967 to 1970. Both shows made her recognizable, but they also trapped her inside an image Hollywood refused to forget. She was viewed as sweet, tiny, and harmless, the cheerful television girl who could ride waves or fly beneath an oversized cornet. The transformation led to more demanding material. In the 1976 television drama, Sybil, Field portrayed a traumatized woman presented as having multiple personalities. Her intense performance eventually earned her the 1977 Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Limited Series. Yet when Reynolds contacted her about Smokey and the Bandit, he had not seen Sybil. Field recalled this detail during a June 2026 episode of TCM and HBO Max's Talking Pictures podcast. She had assumed that her dramatic breakthrough must have changed how Reynolds viewed her. Instead, he told her that he remembered liking her in Gidget. Executives reportedly questioned whether Field was glamorous or sexually appealing enough to play Reynolds' romantic interest. Reynolds pushed back. He later summarized his argument by declaring that talent itself was attractive. His support mattered. At a moment when Field was still fighting the damage done by The Flying Nun, one of Hollywood's most powerful leading men demanded that she appear opposite him. She agreed to meet him, but the prospect terrified her. Field said she had entered television at 18 and missed the ordinary experiences through which many young people learned how to date. When Reynolds' bodyguard arrived to collect her, she felt completely outside her own life. That vulnerability makes the beginning difficult to reduce to a simple villain and victim story. Reynolds recognized her talent when many executives did not. He opened a major cinematic door and made her feel chosen by the most desired man in Hollywood. But being chosen is not the same as being treated as an equal. Reynolds had brought Field into the movie and defended her against executives who underestimated her. Once the cameras were mounted on the Trans Am, however, their scripted performances and their private attraction began merging almost immediately. What happened when two actors stopped following the screenplay and started inventing the movie and their relationship as they went? The movie they made up together. Once filming began, the chemistry did not need to be manufactured. According to Field, almost nothing about it felt planned. Field played Carrie, a runaway bride whom Bandit nicknamed Frog after she climbed into his car. On paper, she could have become little more than cargo, a woman placed beside the male star while the engines, stunts, and police chases controlled the movie. Instead, Field's speed and unpredictability gave Reynolds someone to play against. In 2026, she recalled Reynolds warning her that the screenplay was terrible. His solution was simple. They would repair it by improvising. Cameras were attached to the car, Field would call for them to roll, and the two actors would create their exchanges while driving. Improvisation translated into a natural rhythm. Reynolds projected effortless confidence, while Field interrupted that confidence with rapid questions, sharp reactions, and flashes of absurdity. Carrie was attracted to Bandit, but she was never completely intimidated by him. Viewers were not simply watching a fictional couple develop. Reynolds later wrote that audiences could see two actors falling in love on screen because that was exactly what was happening. Their connection was immediate and intense. Field was around 30, newly divorced and raising two sons. Reynolds was approximately 40, already surrounded by the machinery of stardom. His fame gave him authority on the production, but inside the car, improvisation temporarily created a more balanced space. Each actor needed the other to keep the scene alive. When Smokey and the Bandit opened on May 27, 1977, few expected it to become a cultural phenomenon. The film ultimately earned approximately $126.7 million at the domestic box office, making it one of the biggest releases of the year. Field gained something equally valuable: proof that she could hold her own in a massive theatrical hit. She was no longer only the flying nun, and she was not merely a dramatic actress hidden inside a television event. She could be funny, sensual, spontaneous, and commercially successful. But the conditions that created the first film's magic were unstable. Improvisation had given Field room to challenge Reynolds as a performer. Their personal relationship increasingly placed Reynolds at the center. Field would later describe them as a perfect combination of unresolved weaknesses. His confidence offered safety and excitement, while her desire to be chosen made it easier to surrender parts of herself. If the chemistry looked completely authentic, where did the performance end and the relationship begin? The first film captured a moment when Field felt creatively alive beside Reynolds. What followed looked like more of the same from the outside: additional movies, publicity photographs, and playful appearances. Her memory of those productions is strikingly different. Hollywood records 4 movies starring Sally Field and Burt Reynolds. Nearly 5 decades later, Field said she remembers only one of them as a real collaboration. In the next 3, she no longer felt like the quick, unpredictable woman matching Reynolds line for line. How did his leading lady become, in her own words, just a girl, standing inside his movies? 4 movies, but only 1 collaboration. The official filmography presents Field and Reynolds as a successful screen team. Field's emotional record contains a sharp and dividing line. They appeared together in Smokey and the Bandit in 1977, followed by The End and Hooper in 1978. Field returned for Smokey and the Bandit 2 in 1980. 4 films in 4 years should represent one of the most sustained collaborations of either actor's career. In a May 2026 interview, however, Field said she felt as if she had made only 1 movie with Reynolds, the original Smokey and the Bandit. Her explanation transformed those familiar comedies into evidence of how the relationship had changed. In the 3 later productions, she said she felt like just a girl. She was present because she had become trapped in the larger situation surrounding Reynolds. During the first Smokey and the Bandit, Field remembered participating in the invention of the movie. She and Reynolds drove away with cameras attached to the car and created dialogue together. Her uncertainty became comic energy, and her performance kept pushing back against his established persona. The later films belonged more firmly to Reynolds' professional world. He directed and starred in The End, a dark comedy about a man confronting a terminal diagnosis. In Hooper, he played an aging stunt performer in a production directed by Hal Needham. The movie celebrated the stunt community from which Reynolds and Needham had emerged. Field had roles in both pictures, but neither depended on her perspective. The films revolved around Reynolds' character, his anxieties, his friendships, and his public image. She was the leading man's romantic partner, both in life and inside stories, designed primarily around him. That pattern continued with Smokey and the Bandit 2. Frog returned, but the sequel could not reproduce the accidental freedom of the original. By then, the screen pairing had become a commercial property, while the relationship behind it had accumulated years of conflict. Their personal relationship lasted on and off for approximately 5 years. The same qualities that initially appeared intoxicating became harder for Field to separate from her professional decisions. Reynolds was not only her partner, he was a major star, a collaborator, and the center of the filmmaking circle in which she was working. What appeared to be momentum could also feel like confinement. She did not describe every moment with Reynolds as cruel. That is part of why the relationship lasted. She remembered qualities that were warm, vulnerable, and deeply lovable. But the affectionate version of him existed beside behavior she found frightening and controlling. Field's account of those later sets reveals the first major shift. She was still visible, but no longer felt fully present. To understand why she remained, she eventually had to look beyond the movies and examine the pattern underneath their romance. A pattern that began long before Burt Reynolds entered her life. What was she unconsciously trying to repair by staying with him? The charm and the grip. Field did not fully explain that pattern publicly until the publication of her 2018 memoir, In Pieces. Her description of the relationship was deliberately complicated. She remembered real affection and care, but also confusion and emotional pain. Reynolds was not one fixed personality in her memory. He could be funny and tender, then remote, jealous or controlling. Field wrote that his enormous stardom had become a tool through which he controlled the people surrounding him. Once she entered his world, she felt that force directed toward her. She also connected Reynolds to a far older wound. Field has said that her stepfather, actor and stuntman Jock Mahoney, sexually and emotionally abused her during childhood. Yet Mahoney was not frightening every hour of every day. She also remembered him as magnetic, playful, and capable of making the family feel enchanted. That contradiction shaped her understanding of love. A person could feel wonderful and dangerous at the same time. Affection did not erase fear. Fear did not automatically destroy attachment. Looking back, Field believed her relationship with Reynolds repeated that emotional structure. She was trying to make an old pattern end differently by winning the love of another charismatic, powerful man whose approval could suddenly become disapproval. Field's memoir also described her concern about Reynolds' condition during the making of Smokey and the Bandit. She wrote that he used Percodan, Valium, and barbiturates and sometimes received injections whose purpose was unclear to her. Worried about his stress and physical symptoms, she arranged a discreet examination at the Miami Heart Institute. The tests reportedly found no heart problem. Field urged him to consider psychological help for anxiety, but she said he dismissed the suggestion. She was not merely falling in love with Reynolds, she was monitoring him, worrying about him, and attempting to protect him while gradually surrendering authority over herself. Field wrote that when she tried to assert herself, Reynolds responded by tightening his control, at times in a physical sense. Again, this is her description of the private relationship, not proof that every film set was filled with visible confrontations. The on-set issue was subtler. Reynolds' influence shaped the atmosphere around them. His projects, friends, fame, and emotional needs occupied the center. Field increasingly adapted herself to that structure. Does recognizing someone's talent truly count as support if that support disappears when the person begins choosing for herself? For years, there was no single dramatic exit. Field continued working, loving, arguing, and returning. The decisive moment finally arrived as a stack of pages. The greatest threat to Reynolds' control was not another man or a public scandal. It was a screenplay about an ordinary woman who learns to stand up in a deafening textile mill. When Field brought home the script for Norma Rae, Reynolds did not simply question whether the movie would succeed. According to Field, he threw it back at her. What did Reynolds see in that character that frightened him? The script he threw back. The script was for Norma Rae, and Field immediately recognized something in its central character that she needed. Directed by Martin Ritt and written by Irving Ravitch and Harriet Frank Jr., the film followed a textile worker who becomes involved in efforts to unionize a southern mill. Norma was working class, outspoken, sexually experienced, and imperfect. She was also increasingly unwilling to accept conditions that powerful people expected her to tolerate. According to Field's 2026 account, Reynolds did not want her to accept the role. She said he objected to Norma's sexual history and used a degrading label for the character. During the argument, Field recalled, Reynolds threw the screenplay at her. The physical gesture mattered, but the conflict underneath it mattered more. Field believed Reynolds wanted to control the direction of her career. She was being offered a demanding, dramatic lead that existed entirely outside his professional orbit. Norma was not the girlfriend in a Burt Reynolds vehicle. She was the center of her own story. Reynolds allegedly suggested that Field's growing ambition was getting the better of her. Field's reply was only 6 words. "This is the better of me." That sentence marked a break from the frightened woman who had felt like a clown before their first date. Field was no longer waiting for Reynolds to define which parts of her were attractive, acceptable, or worthy of being placed on screen. She met with director Martin Ritt and accepted the role. Field later described that decision as the beginning of finding her legs. The phrase is especially powerful because Norma Ray required her to inhabit a woman discovering the courage to stand in public when silence would have been safer. The film's most famous image shows Norma climbing onto a table inside the mill and raising a cardboard sign bearing one word: Union. One by one, the workers stop their machines. The overwhelming mechanical roar gives way to silence because one person has finally made herself impossible to ignore. Field's off-screen transformation was not identical to Norma's story. One involved labor, organizing, and dangerous factory conditions. The other involved an actor's relationship and career. Turning them into the same struggle would diminish the real political stakes of the film. Still, Field has said that performing Norma changed her. Learning how the character stood inside her own body helped Field recognize strength that she had struggled to use in private. That is the storyline hidden behind the Hollywood romance. The role Reynolds opposed did more than advance Field's career. It gave her a language for resisting the relationship surrounding her. His objection also reveals a painful irony. Reynolds had once argued that executives should hire Field because talent was attractive. When that talent began carrying her beyond his movies, his support reportedly turned into resistance. The man who helped open the door appeared uncomfortable when Field walked through it alone. None of this proves Reynolds knew Norma Ray would win awards. He may have disliked the material, the character, or the consequences of Field leaving their shared professional world. Field interpreted his behavior as control, and the events that followed convinced her that the relationship was changing. In 1979, the film was selected to compete at the Cannes Film Festival. That invitation should have been a celebration. Instead, it created another confrontation. Reynolds had failed to stop Field from making Norma Ray, but he still questioned whether the world would value it. When Cannes invited the film to compete, he discouraged her from attending and asked whether she honestly thought she would win anything. Field went without his confidence. What happened when the lights came up in France? The festival he told her not to attend. Norma Ray was accepted into competition at the 1979 Cannes Film Festival, placing Field's performance before one of the most influential international audiences in cinema. Reynolds did not share her excitement. Field later recalled that he did not want her to attend. He questioned whether she truly expected to win anything, a remark that transformed a major professional invitation into something she was being foolish to take seriously. The doubt struck at an old vulnerability. Hollywood had spent years telling Field that she was too lightweight for serious acting. Following The Flying Nun, she struggled even to enter audition rooms. Now one of the people closest to her was questioning whether her most important film deserved the journey to Cannes. She went anyway. Field attended with members of the filmmaking team, including director Martin Ritt. She later remembered the screening as an overwhelming experience. When the audience responded to the film, she cried. The festival's official record leaves no ambiguity about the result. Field won the 1979 Best Actress Award for Norma Ray. The role Reynolds reportedly dismissed had now received international recognition. The trip he discouraged became one of the defining events of Field's professional life. If a partner questions your achievement before it has even happened, is that realism? Or fear of who you might become if you succeed? Field's memoir describes the period after filming Norma Ray as one in which previously suppressed parts of her personality began emerging. She could not immediately break Reynolds' emotional hold, but she was becoming less willing to remain still whenever he disapproved. The dynamic changed because Field changed. She was discovering that Reynolds' judgment was not the final measure of her ability. Cannes had confirmed something the actor's studio, Sybil and Martin Ritt, had already taught her. The depth she felt inside herself was real, even when people closest to her refused to recognize it. The contrast became sharper because Reynolds was still one of Hollywood's most commercially successful stars. His fame was larger, but Field's work was entering a different kind of territory. She was building a career based not merely on likability or chemistry, but on emotional authority. That change did not make their earlier love false. It made the relationship increasingly impossible to maintain in its existing form. Field had once been stunned that Reynolds wanted her in his movie. At Cannes, she discovered she no longer needed to be invited into his world. Her own work could carry her into rooms where she stood independently. Winning at Cannes should have ended any question about whether Norma Ray mattered. Instead, Field's growing acclaim created one final, highly public test. The Academy Awards were approaching. Field was nominated for Best Actress. This time, there was no ocean separating Reynolds from the event, and no uncertainty about whether the industry considered her a serious contender. Cannes had already proved Reynolds' doubts wrong, but the largest ceremony in Hollywood was still ahead. Field was nominated for her first Academy Award, and the man who had introduced her to blockbuster movie stardom made his position clear. He would not accompany her. Who stepped into the seat Burt Reynolds left empty? The empty seat at the Oscars. The 52nd Academy Awards took place at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion on April 14, 1980. Field was nominated for Best Actress alongside Jill Clayburgh, Jane Fonda, Marsha Mason, and Bette Midler. Norma Ray had also been nominated for Best Picture, Adapted Screenplay, and Original Song. By then, the possibility that Field might win was no fantasy. She had already received the Best Actress award at Cannes and a Golden Globe for the performance. According to Field's account in Dave Karger's 2024 book, 50 Oscar Nights, Reynolds was unhappy with the attention surrounding her. She remembered him as being unkind during that period and said he would not attend the ceremony with her. The rejection could easily have turned one of the most important nights of her career into an extension of their private conflict. Instead, comedian and filmmaker David Steinberg and his then-wife, Judy Marcioni, offered to accompany her. They did not treat Field's nomination as an embarrassment or a threat. They turned it into a celebration. Field remembered them collecting her in a limousine with champagne waiting inside. The detail may sound small, but it represented the opposite of what she had been experiencing. Rather than questioning whether she deserved the moment, they allowed her to enjoy it. When Dustin Hoffman opened the envelope, Field's name was inside. She walked onto the stage and accepted the Academy Award for Best Actress. The role Reynolds had reportedly tried to discourage had made her an Oscar winner. It is tempting to turn that victory into revenge, as if the award itself defeated Reynolds. Field's achievement was larger than that. She had fought for years against an industry that considered her a television lightweight. Martin Ritt trusted her with a complex working-class character, and Field delivered a performance that permanently altered how Hollywood viewed her. Reynolds' absence, nevertheless, sharpened the meaning of the night. He had once helped place her beside him in a major movie because he believed in her talent. When that talent brought her to the Academy Awards independently, he was not in the seat next to her. The relationship did not end cleanly at the podium. Field and Reynolds remained connected on and off, and she still appeared in Smokey and the Bandit 2, released later in 1980. Their permanent separation came after a longer period of emotional distance. Careers and relationships rarely change in one cinematic moment. The Oscar represented evidence of a process already underway. Field had accepted the script, gone to Cannes, and walked into the ceremony without Reynolds. Each decision weakened the belief that she needed his approval. There is also a common misunderstanding worth avoiding. Field's frequently misquoted "You Like Me" speech came after her second Oscar, for Places in the Heart, in 1985. Her first victory belonged to Norma Rae, and to the period when she was learning to claim her work without apology. The empty seat did not diminish the night. It revealed who was willing to celebrate her when Reynolds would not. Field left the 1980 ceremony with an Oscar, while her relationship with Reynolds continued moving toward its end. More than 3 decades later, Reynolds publicly transformed their painful history into a romantic legend, calling Field the love of his life and the perfect woman he had foolishly lost. But Field did not recognize herself in his version. Who gets to decide what their relationship ultimately meant? The love story he rewrote. For years, Reynolds told a sorrowful version of the story. In his 2015 memoir, But Enough About Me, and interviews promoting it, he described Field as the love of his life. He said he missed her terribly and blamed himself for destroying the relationship. Reynolds' account was emotionally appealing. The aging Hollywood heartthrob looked back on the woman who got away and admitted that he had failed to hold on to the perfect person. It transformed their history into a familiar story about regret, arriving too late. That version also preserved something flattering about Reynolds. He became the flawed man wise enough to recognize his greatest mistake. Field became the lost love, whose value confirmed the depth of his feelings. There were elements of truth that made the story persuasive. Reynolds had defended Field's casting in Smokey and the Bandit. He repeatedly praised her talent. Their first movie captured unmistakable affection, and Field has never denied that she loved parts of him deeply. Regret may have been completely sincere, but sincerity does not give one person ownership of a shared past. When Field addressed Reynolds' romantic narrative in 2022, she rejected the role he had assigned her. She said he had not been someone she could safely remain around. In her view, he had reconstructed the relationship after the fact, making her more important in his memory because she was something he could no longer possess. That response changes the question. The issue is not whether Reynolds regretted losing Field. He may have regretted it profoundly. The issue is whether his regret can overwrite her experience of being controlled, diminished, and hurt. The two had been estranged for decades by the time Reynolds began publicly calling her his greatest love. His statements reached millions of fans, while Field's more difficult account remained largely private until In Pieces appeared in 2018. Her timing created another complication. Reynolds died only days before the memoir was published, meaning he could not respond directly to its detailed portrayal. Field acknowledged that reality and expressed relief mixed with sadness. She did not want to punish him after death. She wanted to tell the truth about her own life. Her 2026 interviews add another layer. Field still does not describe Reynolds as entirely monstrous. She remembers a man who could be wonderful, vulnerable, and lovable, while also possessing qualities she experienced as frightening. That complexity is not a contradiction. People often remain attached precisely because the person causing pain is not cruel every moment. The warmth makes the frightening behavior harder to name, and the history of affection makes leaving feel like betrayal. Field even speaks about their beginning with humor. She remembers the bewildering first date, the bodyguard at the door, and her own nervous clowning. She can acknowledge the excitement without pretending the ending was romantic. Her lighter revelation that Reynolds was her worst on-screen kisser because, she said, too much drooling was involved, became a viral joke in 2022. Yet the more important correction concerned the larger fantasy. Audiences believed they had watched a love story begin during Smokey and the Bandit. Reynolds later encouraged the belief that the story never truly ended for him. Field's account suggests something different. The first film may capture genuine love, but the 3 films that followed reveal how easily professional partnership can narrow when one star holds greater power. The relationship's most revealing moment was not their first kiss or final breakup. It was Reynolds throwing away a script because Field wanted something outside the life they had built around him. Her choice to retrieve that future changed everything. Who owns the story of a relationship when one person turns it into a beautiful legend and the other remembers how difficult it was to escape? The strongest new insight is not that Reynolds secretly hated Field or that every loving moment was false. It is that he could recognize her talent before the industry did and still resist the independence that talent created. Support that lasts only while someone remains within your control is not complete support. Field's journey from Smokey and the Bandit to Norma Ray was therefore larger than a change in genre. In the first movie, Reynolds gave her an opportunity, and she proved she belonged. In the second, she accepted an opportunity he did not want her to take, and discovered she no longer needed him to tell her she belonged. Sally Field's account does not erase the affection visible in Smokey and the Bandit. It reveals the darker struggle behind it. 4 shared films, War One relationship, and a Norma Ray script Reynolds allegedly threw away before it carried Field to Cannes and the Oscars. Do his later regrets change how you see their story? Leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next. Ciao.